Hello, my friends. It's Matthew Street, and welcome to my channel. I'm so happy you're here. Folks, the date is February 9th, 2025. February 9th, a very, very significant and important date for me, and I'm sure for many of you. Because on February 9th, 1964, 61 years ago, my life changed forever. And in many ways for the better, folks, as I'm sure yours did. Now, February 9th, 1964, the Beatles appeared on the Ed Sullivan Show. CBS TV, before 70 million plus Americans watching in their homes, and I was one of them, along with my family and extended family. Now, February 9th, 1964, when the Beatles did appear on Ed Sullivan, that was just before my parents got my first Beatle albums for me. And you've heard the story before if you've watched my channel. They got me Meet the Beatles, and they got me the Hard Day's Night album a few months after that show. That night made a very big impression on my parents when they saw the Beatles. Again, they were in their early 30s at the time. They had me a little late. You know, back in those days, people were having kids in their late teens, early 20s. My parents were a little later. They were both 30 years old or so when they had me. So by the time the Beatles appeared on Ed Sullivan, they were, in their early 30s, approaching their middle 30s. But something about the Beatles sparked them. Something about that band from Liverpool. And they understood that they were having a great positive effect on the youngsters back then, the young people, the teenagers. And so, although I was a little bit young, I was, like I say, 3.5 years old or so, I could understand, and I do remember seeing them on the Ed Sullivan Show, but they got kind of caught up in that mania a little bit. They wanted their young son to experience the excitement that was a thrill for all the young people of the day, like my 3 older cousins, 3 boys who were older than me, who were getting into the mania of the Beatles. And so that's what sparked them to buy those 2 albums for me. And I'll forever be indebted to them for doing that, because it sent my life on a positive pathway of loving music that I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. Now, at the time, on February 9th, 1964, my parents had been married well under 10 years. I was their first child. My mother was due for my younger brother, their second child at the time. She was pregnant. And they lived on a second-floor apartment, very modest second-floor apartment, above my maternal grandparents in Providence, Rhode Island. Now, this was on a little street called Cogshall Street in Providence, Rhode Island. I will show you an image of that house as it looks today, but it's still there in Providence. And we were on the second floor. My grandfather had the home from the early 1900s when his family came over from Italy. They settled there. My grandfather, his brother, my great-grandparents, his parents from Italy lived there. And they had the entire house, both the first and second floor. So when my mom and her 2 older brothers were being raised there, they had the entire home. By the time I was born, my grandfather had converted that second floor of the home into a living area for my mom, my dad, and I. We had a little bathroom, as I said, a kitchen, a couple of one bedroom and one little den area. It was very modest, as I said. And my parents only had a small wooden hi-fi music player. I won't call it a stereo because it wasn't really stereo. It was like one speaker. And I'll show you a facsimile of what that looked like from the era, from the late 50s, the one they had. It was basically like a boxy-looking piece of furniture with 4 legs. And it, they put it in the corner in the den, and that's where they played all their records and their music. And they loved it. And their love of music was passed on to me and my 2 younger brothers. Now, my mother's older brother, who was the middle child of the 3, it was my uncle and my aunt. And as I said, my 3 older cousins who were boys. And they lived just a little over a mile away on this street in Providence called Texas Avenue. whatever, for whatever reason. And I'll show you what that house looks like today, the actual home that I got off maps, Google Maps or something. But it's still there. It looked a little different back in 64, but you'll give you an idea. It was a modest home, single family home, but for the time they were very proud of it and happy to live there. And they had a different stereo and TV setup. They had one of those stereo console setups where it was like a long, almost like 5 feet long. I'll show you images of a facsimile of what I believed it, my memory serves me, is what it looked like. And it was like a piece of furniture, bigger than the one my parents had. It was wider. It had 2 speakers, so it was stereo. It had a radio player up top, although my parents had a radio in theirs, but it had the turntable. And I believe theirs, I don't know if cassettes or 8 tracks were out in 64, but if they were, they may have had some type of tape player in this long stereo console. And my understanding is when you slid open the 2 front doors, there was they also had a TV. So it was the perfect scenario for us to go over there to see the Beatles on Ed Sullivan on February 9th because they had the better system and they had a bigger living room that could fit more people. So on this night, when the Beatles were on the show, everyone had to see it. I mean, we were going over, my mom, dad, and I. I'm not sure if my grandparents came over. They lived below us in our little place. I don't know if they went, but I know an extended family group did show up. It could have been like, friends of my aunt and uncle or maybe my aunt's family or whatever. But I do remember a lot of people. It wasn't just my mom, her brother, who was my uncle, and their family and us. It was more. That living room was pretty full that night because everyone was abuzz about the Beatles on Ed Sullivan. So we went over, and like any good Italian family, I'm only half Italian. My mom's side's all Italian, as I said, came from Italy. My dad is, Scotch and Irish and English, so I'm only half. But when we went over there, well, it was a typical Italian feast. I'm talking the wine was flowing, the beer, the soda, the antipasto salad, the fresh Italian bread, hot and smelling wonderful. Oh, homemade pasta, meatballs homemade, sausage, stuffed peppers, you name it, it was there. And the desserts, do I even know to go into the desserts, the cannolis and everything else that were there that night. But it was a typical, let's get together, have a great time as a family. And this is a big event on the TV. All the kids want to see it. So we're going to see the Beatles. So after dinner, and everyone eats and relaxes and hangs out and digests their wonderful meal and all that. Well, now it's time to get ready for the show. And folks, the Beatles did not disappoint. And I have memories of it. I have memories of being mesmerized, of looking around the room at the other kids who were there, my cousins and any of the other kids that were there. And they were mesmerized and they were excited. The adults, I remember the reactions of some were laughing, not laughing in a mean way, but just like laughing together, socialize. But, to see these long-haired guys on TV singing. Some scoffed at it a little bit. I think I remember my uncle doing like the old, like that kind of thing. But some were into it. Some of the younger adults were into it. But I know one thing, it had a profound effect on me because how this young band of 4 young men could come on the screen like that, this little screen on the stereo console, and their beautiful music coming out of those speakers, and how it could have such a profound impact on so many different generations and age categories that were there that night. And not only there, we were just a microcosm of what was going on around the country at the time. 70 million plus watching that broadcast. And the impact it had on our little group was, going a million times over or more throughout every household almost in the United States. And I didn't know that at that time. I was just in my little world of seeing this band, these guys on the Ed Sullivan Show, seeing them and the impact it had on us. And to know that ripple effect was what was coming out of our little TV there in Providence, Rhode Island at my uncle's house, was rippling across the entire nation and building up into this frenzy of fandom and love for the Beatles and their music. I don't think anything like that will ever be recreated again, folks. I don't. I don't think there'll ever be a moment in time where so many millions of people gather, families, friends, generations, age groups, gather for one moment in time like that to see a specific musical act, and how that musical act can have such an important influence on so many people. And now here it is resonating 61 years later with all of us. So for me, I'm still that 3.5-year-old little boy, still there with my family, loving every moment of it. And every time I listen to the Beatles or play the Beatles or pull out an album like this, which is a fan club only issue, wink, wink, of the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, I listen to this type of thing or watch the DVDs, it takes me right back to that moment, folks. It takes me back to family, to love, friendship, kinship, and the Beatles are a big part of that, folks. They are a big part of it. So that's it, folks. I just wanted to share a few minutes of my personal little story on how this date, February 9th, way back in 1964, had such an impact and influence on me that it's brought me up to this moment right here, right now, with all of you. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll be back very soon with much more. Please subscribe, please like, comment. It really helps my channel grow, and I would truly appreciate it. Thanks. Bye-bye.